Dear deep sea fishers of Reddit, what's the strangest thing you've seen heard on the open ocean? While on a sailing cruise returning to Miami from the Bahamas, I was permitted to pilot the boat while the crew sat down for dinner. I was told to simply follow a certain heading on the compass. As we were going along, I noticed the position of the sun was rather rapidly changing as I was chasing the heading on the compass. I returned to what I thought was the correct heading and watched in amazement as the compass began to spin in circles. We had been scuba diving, so several of us had compasses and they were all exhibiting the same behavior. The heading on the GPS was unaffected. After maybe 10-20 seconds, the spin slowed to a stop back on the correct heading. The crew logged the coordinates of the anomaly. The best guess we had was that we'd crossed over an old shipwreck, perhaps something hauling a large amount of some magnetic metal over to the Bahamas. Late to the party etc etc. Not my story, but rather my granddad's, who was a chief engineer on trawler ships operating out of Hull, was fishing at night off the coast of Norway in the 70s, I believe, when a call came on radio. Worth nothing, it was an open secret all the radio operators on the trawlers worked for the government and also had sonar equipment to listen for USSR subs to evacuate a 100 or so mile area, and if the trawlers could not get their nets up in time to GTFO, then they should just cut them free, which is a very expensive thing to do when you have dozens of miles of nets out in the water. On the way out, my granddad's trawler and other trawlers in the area saw massive white flash on the horizon. After returning to Hull, it was discovered a ship called the Gaul had never returned and had lost all radio contact around time of this flash. Fast forward 20 or so years later and the wreckage of the Gaul was discovered and officially sank because of a waste flow pipe being overwhelmed by a massive wave that flooded the lower compartments of the ship and sent her to the bottom. Rather interestingly, there was no human remains found on or near the ship, nor any equipment, food, bedding etc, and all the windows had been blown outwards, along with a hole about 3 meters across through the middle of the ship, with all the metalwork being twisted upwards towards the sky. My granddad always insisted up to his death that the sea that night was as still as a pond and that his radio operator was fairly sure the GTFO warning came from the Gaul. As well, around the time of the Gaul's sinking, 16 unknown graves were created and filled in Murmansk, Russia. Another one of his favorite stories was that one day the engine for hauling in the nets was redlining and came very close to exploding, so had to be shut off as they assumed the nets had got stuck on the bottom. A few minutes later, a Soviet sub surfaced behind them with the nets stuck to the periscope, complete with a bunch of very pissed-off Soviet sailors armed with guns who unhooked the nets and disappeared back under the water. It was a known tactic that Soviet subs tried to sit under the trawlers and use them as cover to get out into the Atlantic, hence a lot of the ships having government-paid radio operators on board. A couple that are friends with my parents sailed from France to Africa, then to South America. They also didn't have all the proper equipment you are supposed to have in order to do this legally and as safe as possible. They were a week or two away from the end of their trip when they confirmed their feeling of not being alone. At night they'd think they'd hear another ship, but no sight of anything. They'd hear water breaking from something but never saw why. This continued and seemed to be getting closer. Then just a few days before the end of their trip, an American submarine suddenly surfaced near them. It stayed afloat for a while, then went back under. His theory was since they didn't have a proper sat radio, they weren't aware they were being hailed to identify. The American Navy was probably like, WTF is this, and kept track of them or even followed them for days, weeks. At the end, the Americans were probably even more curious. Surfaced, saw a bewildered sunburned French sailing couple, cursed and went back to doing whatever they were supposed to be doing. I bet they got the proper equipment after that. Not a fisher, but spent some time at sea. Used to work on an oceanographic research vessel. Doing box cores and piston cores of the ocean floor brought up all kinds of things. Coke cans, a magic marker, etc. If you're on an old steamer trade route, you bring up a lot of clinker coal, which is the burnt up coal from the old boilers that they put over the side. It's possible to analyze the clinker coal and determine what general area it was mined in England or Europe, the USA, etc. One fun thing we used to do was lash a small net bag to the cable that held the box core, and we'd put styrofoam cups in it. As the box core and its cable would descend, sometimes several thousand fathoms, the cups would compress due to the pressure. We'd haul up the box core and in the bag would be perfect little styrofoam cups, one stroke too high. We had hundreds of them. Also once saw a whale swimming by, mid-Atlantic, that was trailing a load of fishing gear, nets and some high flares. It was not pleasant to see. This credit is full of repeated questions that never end. However, this is a question that surfaces every few months and I love reading through them. Thanks OP. Surfaces. Not deep sea but fishing. About 10 years ago now I was fishing at Coles Bay, Australia. There were 4 of us in the 14-foot aluminium boat that day. We were bottom fishing for flathead in the bay when the weather started cutting up. Not wanting to give up so early, we decided to do one more drift near the beach. We were in shallow enough water that you could almost see the bottom. Quiet fishing occurs for a few minutes when suddenly my rod almost bends completely in two and the line snaps. The same thing happens to my uncle to the right of me. Thinking we're hitting rocks and snagging, my granddad tells my cousin to pull his line up. Something bites. He manages to pull it up for 1 or 2 winds before his line snaps. Just enough to pull this thing's shadow into view. It was the shadow of a massive stingray, almost as long as the boat and wide enough to darken the waters around us. We all went completely silent and watched it swim away. Never seen anything like it before or since. We checked later and the water was only 15-20 feet deep there. Stingray do swim at considerably shallow waters. From some of these responses I'm starting to wonder if people in submarines just enjoy fricking with people on boats. I worked on offshore oil drilling rigs in the Gulf of Mexico for a number of years. I know I saw a lot of things that were interesting to me, but I don't know about anyone else. The one thing that sticks in my mind right this minute is standing on the empty bow of the barge, 150 miles off of the coast of Louisiana, and seeing a flight of huge manta rays swim fly by below me in a jet-like V formation. I think there were maybe 9 of them together, and it was beautiful. So, me being a 19-year-old, I chunked a big piece of metal off the barge at them, a drop of about 90 feet. I didn't hit any, but they peeled off and dove just like a formation of jet fighters going down in an attack. I had no idea they behaved like that. I've never heard of anyone else mentioning seeing it before either. Have any of you? I don't fish, but when I was in the Navy we parked the ship over the Marianas Trench with is like 5 miles deep, and went swimming. I did not see anything but in my mind. It's freaky swimming in water that deep. My dad owns a fishing boat, so we used to go offshore fishing very often when I was younger. I have a few not so creepy stories. First one was on our trip in the Florida Keys. We were maybe 30 miles offshore, no land or other vessels in sight. We were hauling butt away from some quickly approaching storm cloud when I saw a funnel cloud appear. It was kind of eerie being an 8-year-old and seeing this crap a few thousand feet behind you, knowing that if it got close enough to us and we didn't make it, no one would ever know for a long time and there's nothing we can do about it. Another time, when I was about 10, we were trolling for fish 40 miles or so off the coast of Bimini, Bahamas, and this large lump floated within a few feet of our boat. It was a dead sea turtle, a pretty big one too. We gaffed it, flipped it over in the water, and there was a huge baseball-sized hole through its underside, and it went all the way through its body until it reached its shell area. It was like a neat cylinder had been carved out of its body, and it looked flat black. I don't know if it was just rotting, but it almost looked charred. Turtle also had numerous hooks and cut lines coming out of its mouth, which is pretty normal for dead ones. We set it loose. Still no idea what happened to it. This last story I thought I had dreamt or something until I asked my dad about it recently and he confirmed it. I was around the same age as my last 2 stories, and we were offshore fishing for mahi pretty much all day. I don't remember if we were on the Gulf side or Atlantic side, but the water was seriously deep and blue. We must have been many miles offshore, and looking at the sonar I remember it being much deeper than 2,000 feet. Anyway, about midday, bored 10-year-old me was sitting on the roof of our center console, and I see this dark shape about 20 feet under the surface. It was seriously huge and definitely not a whale or anything. It was man-made, a gigantic butt submarine, and it was right next to our boat, like 20 feet away. It stayed next to us for about 60 seconds, then submerged slowly and went on its way. It was so creepy seeing it out in the middle of absolutely nowhere, and knowing that there were people right inside of it. We were out at night once, with our lights off because we were admiring a field of bioluminescent stuff that was just stretching for miles around us. Really freaky looking but neat. right up until a shadow twice the size of our boat started coming right towards us. We were deep sea fishing out in a thick fog one morning. Couldn't see more than 10-15 feet out from the boat. Fish bite was sporadic, very quiet except for the water lapping at the sides of the boat and the occasional seabird or distant horn. During a particularly quiet moment, these couple of old guys started talking about the large passenger jet that crashed into the water years ago near where we were fishing and how they only recovered a small number of bodies from the hundreds of dead passengers. Staring down at the calm dark waters and listening to the old guys talk, I couldn't help but imagine the corpses drifting up from the depths and surfacing all around our boat. Imagined seeing the fuselage's silhouette in the fog. Creeped myself out. I'm a marine biologist. While at uni I went out to the deep ocean on a scientific cruise. We were trawling about 800 meters. Pulled up the catch. I found a hermit crab. What was cool about this was it wasn't in a mollusk shell but was in a hard anemone. The anemone had a bottom part that was hard and hollow, perfectly fitted for the crab. On top was 2 clusters of stingers. It was an awesome little symbiotic relationship in which the anemone gave the hermit crab shelter and protection and the crab presumably moved the anemone to food. Anyway, I tagged and bagged it for another scientist to look at. I never followed what happened with it. I tried to search if it had been discovered. I couldn't find anything. It could have been a unique discovery. My dad, who is as rational of a scientist as you can possibly be, has experienced very vivid hallucinations that he truly believed were real at the time. His friend's family had sold a sailboat to a buyer up the eastern seaboard, so my dad and his friend, young amateur sailors, decided to sail the boat up the coast and deliver it. This was in the late 70s or early 80s, so I guess they didn't have the 24/7 crack news team of the Weather Channel telling them what was coming. Apparently, a tropical storm was coming and they had no idea. It caught them when they were some ways from shore, with no exact idea of where they were. They had to just ride it out because going inshore in a storm like that was too risky when you didn't know the waters. They didn't sleep for several days while they had to fight tooth and nail to keep the boat above water. During that time, my dad says he saw all kinds of crap in the ocean. Mermaids, the souls of the damned, you name it. Really shows you where all those old sailors' tales come from. I can't believe I'm so late to this question. I do quite a bit of saltwater fishing, and anytime I'm on a chartered boat, I always ask this question to the captain. On a blackfin tuna trip out of Key West 3 years ago, I asked the question, and without thinking, or blinking really, the captain said a dead elephant in the middle of the ocean. I'll never forget that. Same captain also told me that while tied behind a shrimp boat not far offshore, his client pulled up a large grouper with a human knee joint and muscle flesh inside its mouth. They went back to shore and contacted the appropriate authorities to let them know a shrimper had possibly dismembered someone and tossed them into the ocean. Weird stuff. Not strangest thing seen or heard, but more felt. I was spearfishing a reek off the west coast of Florida and found a neato den of Goliath grouper, each in the 400-pound class. Now these are a protected species, so I'm not allowed to shoot them, but going in a little closer to get a good look seemed like a great idea. Now when a Goliath grouper feels threatened, they can drum their gillplets, which creates this underwater boom 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 which makes your whole body vibrate. Now imagine like 5 of these bad boys just vibrating the crap out of this reek. And I'm in 40 feet of water, very aware of that. I hold no power down here. I had to wash that wetsuit a little more thoroughly. My father was a fisherman, and we used to live on the boat with him. When I was about 5, he put me in a toad full of seawater and then dropped a hagfish in there. So there's that. He also fished with a man who would shoot sharks with rifles. One of his buddies was trawling off the BC coast back in the 80s when he snagged something with his net. Despite being under power, whatever, he had started towing his boat backwards at about 7 knots. He eventually had to cut his nets with an axe or be dragged out to sea. Probably not Godzilla though. Locals guess it was a US or Soviet sub being sneaky. Another fellow trawled up a 2,000-year-old Greek amphoray in deep water not far from Tofino. Museums offered him a bunch for it, but he kept dried flowers in it instead. I wish there were more responses to this thread. I'm not a deep sea fisherman, so I have nothing to contribute other than upvotes. Will upvote for good stories. Fishing in Alaska for halibut, we ended up catching a huge 320 pounds one, and it flopped into the boat and then proceeded to shatter my friend's leg like it was a twig with one hit from its tail. We ended up killing it before it could hurt anyone else and took my friend to the hospital. The captain should have a gun. All guides up there do, and anything over about 150 pounds will be shot before bringing it on board. Big halibut can cause serious damage. I think it's the signs of intelligence I've seen in the ocean that I found to be the most strange. Off the coast of Ventura, California, I watched 3 gray whales mating for an hour and a half. As it was explained to me, the 2 males will have a mild brawl, and the losing male will then hold the female in position so that the dominant one can impregnate her. Essentially, they're such big creatures that it takes 3 to tango. What was strange about it though was the volume of other sea life that was present. There was an entire column of seals jumping in and out of the water in front of them, as though leading them in procession. There were also dolphins everywhere. Like pretty much as far as you could see in all directions, dolphins would be appearing. All these life forms, us included, were surrounding these whales as they motored up the coast of California. It was something straight out of The Lion King, and suggests that these creatures have relationships that we don't even begin to fathom. Fishing in the Whitsundays in Australia, we hooked up to a large wahoo or barracuda. We brought it to the surface and a second wahoo was swimming around the other one in an apparent state of real distress. It seemed to me that it was the partner of the other creature and was genuinely concerned for its mate's safety. It wasn't trying to eat it. The fish was relatively calm on the surface, but then I moved into a position to gaff it, and it seemed as though when the animal saw the gaff it panicked and started trying to dive deep again. My mate had done a lousy job of tying on the lure, so we lost it. But I'll admit that I have never felt so glad to lose a trophy fish. I've caught loads of fish over the years, hundreds if not thousands, yet this one still really haunts me, and truthfully made a major dent in the amount of fishing I still do. Everything about the experience told me there were animals with significant intelligence. Scuba diving and snorkeling with giant cuttlefish. They're incredibly beautiful and seem to have real intelligence. Octopus are too, but they're much less curious and more elusive. I've also had some interesting encounters with moray eels. I think we vastly underestimate the intelligence of marine life. One other quick story. I know an old bloke, bit of a rough diamond, used to be a pro fisherman. We were once watching some guys dropping crab traps, all into the same area. He said to me that they were idiots, because all animals have a distress call, and once you capture one, all the others will flee. In so many words, I realize there are great evolutionary reasons for a species to warn its kin of impending doom, but I can't help but ponder whether it too suggests to a more sophisticated mode of existence than we give the humble crab credit for. Sure enough, and in spite of maybe 20 traps, we watched them pull up one single crab the next day. My brother crossed the Atlantic sailing alone multiple times. When he was right in the middle of the ocean, he took ahead, wasn't alone that time. He isn't insane, and came back straight up. He said being in the water and knowing there is 5 kilometers of it under you with God knows what in it was too overwhelming and scary. He has many story but none I can retell with enough details. I don't see him so often as he pretty much lives on the ocean. One thing that strikes me is how all those hardened sailors pay so much respect, almost fear, to the sea and what lives in it. Oh, my time to shine. I was fishing in Florida, Gulf Coast, for grouper that we were going to eat later that evening. So me and a few buds go out to this common wreck that sits on top of a pre-existing reef. No luck. But this isn't a problem, we will just go out further and go for tuna dolphin. The fish also known as mahi-mahi. So as we head out to this drop-off, dolphins, the actual marine mammals, start following us in our wake. Now this isn't uncommon whatsoever. I watch them blissfully while the rest of my friends were looking on the charts for where to start our drift. All of a sudden the dolphins are gone. This sort of eerie feeling comes over me and one single smaller dolphin is in our wake. Then a massive column of water erupts from behind us. I see a red cloud where the dolphin would have been. That's the closest I have ever been to crapping myself. My instinct is to run to my friends and get a fricking line in the water. They were dismissive, but it happened near the drop-off anyway. Do they turn around? They can see the slightly diluted cloud of blood where the dolphin was. We get a line in the water and after 5 minutes it keels over and snaps. We get one with a wire lead in the water and nothing bites. Honestly, it was a mako or maybe a great white shark, but it was just the strangest thing that's ever happened while I was fishing. Oh, and we caught a 75-pound yellowfin that day, and it was some of the best fish I have ever eaten. Was deep sea fishing off the coast of Long Island, passed by a Russian marker buoy that was untethered and just floating around. I do a lot of fishing at night. The weirdest things I've seen caught are the greater hammerhead sharks. They look downright creepy in person at night. Fell overboard once. All I heard was a faint and very deep moan. I know that it was a whale, but sometimes I have doubts. It didn't sound like a whale. It was the sound of the gods telling you better have butt hoopin' insurance for you are about to pay a deductible. I go on weekend tuna fishing trips off the coast of Massachusetts, usually about 12 hours offshore. Being in the middle of the ocean in the middle of the night is such a surreal and unnerving experience. Everywhere you look in every direction is complete blackness. You'll hear strange sounds from whales or other sea creatures. It's such a strange feeling. I was about 35 kilometers off the Pacific coast of Costa Rica and stingrays started jumping out of the water. At first it was just a few, but within 5 minutes there were hundreds and hundreds in every direction. It lasted about a half an hour. Not a deep sea fisher, but I scuba dive. My friends and I went diving near a research pier, got permission as we didn't want to disturb their research, and while diving, there was a beautiful rock formation that looked like a small cave. I swam over with my buddy and peeked inside. Lo and behold, I made full eye contact with a shark. Most scariest thing I've come across while diving. I was about 40 miles off the coast of the Carolinas and see a watermelon bobbing along in the water next to the boat. So random. When I was fishing off the coast of Australia, I saw a man who was also fishing. Suddenly he jumped in the sea and tries to catch a fish bigger than him. After 10 to 15 minutes he caught fish. The fish was too much big. It was about 6.5 or 7 feet long and was very heavy. Strayer. During the 70s was fishing with my dad and one of his old buddies from the Navy, both World War II Navy vets, off the coast of San Diego, not too far out, mostly near the kelp beds. Anyway, the boat is 16.5 feet in length and a shark a little longer than the boat came up and first bumped the stern of the boat. It slowly swam next to the boat where we could see it was longer than the boat itself, then slowly swam off. My dad had us all reel in and we headed back into SD Bay where presumably there wouldn't be big sharks. It looked to be a great white. Only time I ever saw my dad freaked out like that. Sailing a 5-day passage from BVI to Grand Turk, becalmed some, and had not heard about comet Hailbop. Watched it hang there motionless in the night sky and figured it must be a comet. Later learned I had missed the alien rendezvous. Not my story, but my dad's. He was fishing off Connecticut one summer back in the 70s and a sub popped up out of the water a few hundred yards away from his boat. It hung out there for 15 minutes or so and then dove back down. Not a personal experience but a cool fact. I have a cousin from California that lives just outside of San Francisco and he dives for abalone a few times a year. If you've never heard of abalone, the best description is they resemble a clam but only have half a shell and they suction themselves onto whatever they can find and use the half shell as protection. They are considered a delicacy and bring in anywhere from $70 to $100 a piece depending on size. They have strict laws that make these half-shelled clam-like animals hard as heck to scavenge. You can only free dive, no scuba gear, and you can only harvest 3 at a time, as well as immediately having to tag them when you do harvest one. He said about once every 5 years the EPA will have a sting in Chinatown where these shop owners get together on a boat at night, equipped with full diving gear and go out and harvest the heck out of abalone, then leave them anchored to the bottom of the sea in a bag, and come back the next night and dive back down and get the bag, trying not to raise suspicion. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.